She thought mopping floors at the Harrison Tower would help her pay rent and maybe scrape together enough money to buy her little brother's medicine. She never imagined that one careless moment would trap her in a world of secrets darker than any marble hallway she had ever polished. Isabella Wilson had never seen the CEO in person. All she knew was that Adrian Harrison was a name whispered by managers with fear and envy tangled in every syllable. Billionaire, cold, untouchable. Now her breath caught in her throat as she crouched behind a marble column on the 42nd floor, where she was never supposed to be. It was late. The office lights were dim, except for a soft glow spilling from the grand conference room at the end of the corridor. Voices drifted out, sharp and low. One voice sliced through her like ice. It had to be him. She should have turned around, should have wheeled her mop bucket away and forgotten whatever she thought she heard. But exhaustion made her bold, or maybe just foolish. She leaned forward, just enough to catch a glimpse. Inside, Adrian Harrison stood at the head of the long mahogany table. Tall in a perfectly cut black suit, a phone pressed to his ear, while another man shifted nervously by his side. They were talking numbers she barely understood. Stocks, fraud, something about shutting down a leak before the press could smell blood. Isabella's stomach twisted. She could not follow every word, but she felt the danger like static in her bones. Her mind screamed to run, but her feet stayed planted. Then the phone clicked shut. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke her. Then that cold voice spoke 3 words that turned her blood to stone. "Who's there?" Her breath caught. Her fingers dug into the mop handle as if it could make her invisible. The slow click of shoes echoed closer until a shadow fell over her hiding spot. She held her breath and lifted her eyes. The first thing she saw was not the suit or the shoes, but his eyes. They were empty in a way that frightened her more than anger could. Adrian Harrison looked down at the girl crouched behind the column, her cheap uniform stained with bleach, her hair tied back with a frayed elastic. He asked her calmly what she had heard. She shook her head, words tumbling out of her mouth. "Nothing, I swear. I was just cleaning. I didn't hear anything." He tilted his head like he could read every lie in her stammer. He asked again, softer this time, but his voice brushed against her ear like a blade. "Did you hear anything you shouldn't have?" Her pulse pounded so loud she thought he might hear it. She whispered "no" again, hoping he would believe it, but she saw in his eyes he never trusted anyone. He lifted his wrist and spoke into his watch. A moment later, a man in a dark suit stepped forward from the shadows behind him. Lucas. The man looked at her like she was a stain that needed scrubbing out. She realized too late that she had stumbled into a room where secrets were currency and she had none to trade. Adrian leaned closer, close enough that she smelled his cologne, sharp and cold. "You have 2 choices, little maid. You disappear tonight, or you do exactly what I say." Isabella's mind flashed to her brother waiting at home, the unpaid rent, the hospital bills she could never cover alone. Her lips trembled. She whispered, "I will do anything." She did not see the corner of his mouth lift when she said it. She would only remember later that when Adrian Harrison smiled, it never touched his eyes. Lucas reached down and pulled her to her feet. She did not fight. She clutched the mop handle with numb fingers as if splintered wood could hold her to the life she knew. She was a poor cleaner, an invisible girl with no name, no shield, but tonight she would become a secret that no one would ever speak about again. Isabella Wilson had grown up invisible. She learned early that the world did not slow down for a girl who had nothing to offer but a tired smile and 2 working hands. Her mother died when Isabella was 11, leaving her with the father who vanished before the funeral flowers wilted. From then on, it was just Isabella and her baby brother Noah, whose tiny heart was never strong enough for the world outside their dusty apartment. By the time she turned 21, Isabella had traded sleep for night shifts, college lectures for mop buckets, and any silly dreams of fairy tales for bills that never waited. She took every cleaning shift she could find, from grimy diners to luxury towers like Harrison Corp. though most nights she wondered why she bothered with a place so polished she could see her reflection on every surface, a reflection that reminded her she did not belong there. Across the city, the name Adrian Harrison meant power whispered behind locked doors. He was 32, the youngest Harrison to ever hold the CEO title since the dynasty began. Some said he inherited his father's ruthlessness, but none of the man's warmth, if warmth ever ran in Harrison blood at all. The tabloids called him the Ice King when they were generous, and the devil in a suit when they were honest. Investors feared him. Competitors envied him. Women gossiped about the sharp lines of his jaw and the colder lines of his smile. No one truly knew him. Rumors clung to him like shadows, the kind that said his mother's death was not an accident, that his father's empire was built on secrets buried deeper than the foundations of the tallest Harrison building. He ignored every rumor, the same way he ignored almost everyone around him. Isabella did not know any of this in detail. She knew the basics. She knew her supervisor warned her never to linger near the executive floors unless she was prepared to lose her job. She knew Harrison Corp paid 3 times the rate of her other jobs because they expected her to keep her eyes down, her ears shut, and her mouth sealed. That was why the moment she heard the click of Adrian's shoes, she knew she had broken an unspoken rule, far more dangerous than any written contract. She should have turned and begged him to fire her. Instead, she agreed to whatever he wanted. Anything. The word tasted like betrayal when she thought of Noah's tiny chest rising and falling on the squeaky mattress back home. She had promised him once that she would never abandon him the way their father did. A promise cost nothing. Living up to it cost her freedom. The man who would decide her fate now sat in the highest office of the Harrison Tower, where glass walls framed the entire New York skyline like a trophy. That night, Isabella sat trembling on a leather chair that probably cost more than she made in a year. Lucas stood beside her, a silent guard dog waiting for a command. Adrian leaned back in his chair, steepled fingers tapping against his lips while his eyes stripped her bare in ways that had nothing to do with clothes. He asked about her life, her debts, her family. She answered every question, because lying was pointless now. He spoke so calmly, so coldly, that when he finally laid out what he wanted from her, her stomach turned to stone. "You will stay close to me. You will not repeat what you heard. You will not leave unless I allow it. In return, your brother's medical bills are covered, your rent is paid, your debts erased." He did not say the word mistress. He did not have to. Isabella's eyes burned with shame she could not swallow. She asked if there was another way. He said no. She asked why her, why not someone else. He said trust was rare, purity rare. He said it without blinking, as if purity was a thing to be bought, a thing he could break when it suited him. She hated him for that calm smile more than she feared him in that moment. But hate did not pay for Noah's heart medicine. Hate did not feed him when she was gone all night. So Isabella whispered yes again. She signed the papers Lucas laid in front of her. She did not look at the numbers, though she caught a glimpse that made her breath stop. More money than she could ever imagine. Yet none of it hers, really. It was the price of silence. The price of a promise she did not know how to keep. When Lucas drove her home that night, she stared out the tinted window at a city that suddenly looked different, too bright, too sharp, too far from the quiet life she clung to. She did not know that the penthouse she would soon step into would become her cage. She did not know that the man who sat behind that grand glass desk would become her master in name, but something far more dangerous in her heart. All she knew was that for Noah she would do anything, and for Adrian Harrison, anything was never enough. Isabella moved into the penthouse 3 days after signing the papers. She told herself she would never unpack her heart, no matter how many clothes Lucas hung for her in the enormous walk-in closet. Adrian did not greet her when she arrived. He did not say welcome or even look her way, as Lucas explained which wing of the penthouse belonged to her. Her room was as cold and quiet as the man who now owned her silence. That first night she lay awake on silk sheets, staring at the ceiling, listening for his footsteps that never came. She wondered if he would come in drunk, if he would force her to become what the contract said she was. But the hallway stayed empty, and she hated herself for feeling relief. In the morning, Lucas woke her before the sun rose. Isabella dressed in the uniform he left folded on the edge of her bed, a plain black dress with a collar too stiff for someone who had spent her life in secondhand sweaters. She sat in the back of the car that carried Adrian to the Harrison Tower each day. She said nothing while he read reports on his tablet, his eyes flicking up only once to meet hers in the reflection of the window. They did not speak that first ride. They did not speak the next day either. Days slipped into weeks the same way. Silent car rides, longer nights, whispers among the other assistants when they saw her stepping out of the penthouse elevator behind him. Some called her a pet. Some called her worse. She never corrected them because the truth was uglier than any rumor. One night, after a long dinner with foreign investors who spoke in circles until the wine bottles emptied, Adrian pushed his chair back and told her to follow him. She did. He stopped in the middle of the grand hotel suite and turned to face her like he was looking through her. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and for the first time she saw a crack in the mask that made him Adrian Harrison, the man who never needed anyone. He asked her if she hated him. The question made her breath hitch. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to scream it. Instead, she told the truth. "I don't know how to hate you yet." Adrian laughed. One low sound that vanished as quickly as it came. He stepped closer. His hand lifted as if to touch her face, but stopped an inch away. He said she was too good for this, that she should have run when she had the chance. Then he told her to leave. She went back to her small room in the penthouse, but sleep did not find her. She lay awake, replaying his voice, wondering why a man who could have broken her with a single order held himself back. It should have been simple. He owned her silence, her time, her body if he wanted. But Adrian Harrison never touched her. Not the way the contract implied. Not the way the world assumed. Each day he kept her close enough to burn, but far enough that the fire never caught. Each day she felt something shift inside her chest, something terrifying because it did not feel like hate. Weeks bled into months. Isabel learned his schedule better than Lucas. She learned how he liked his coffee, scalding black before dawn, how he would barely touch the breakfast the housekeeper brought up each morning. She learned he hated lilies in the flower arrangements, but never told anyone why. Sometimes she caught him standing at the window of his office, staring down at the city lights, his expression so empty she wondered if he was remembering something or forgetting everything at once. One evening, she found him asleep on the leather couch in his office, tie loosened, papers scattered around him. She stood frozen for a moment before she gathered the files and set them in order, afraid he would wake and see how her hands trembled. He did not wake. She draped a blanket over his shoulders and slipped out before the sunrise could remind her what they were. The first time they touched was an accident. A storm had turned the city to glass and noise. Isabella stood at the edge of the penthouse balcony, letting the rain soak her through her thin cotton shirt. She told herself she only wanted to feel clean for once. She did not hear him step out behind her. His hand closed around her wrist, so suddenly she gasped. He pulled her back, his eyes dark with something between rage and fear. He asked if she had lost her mind, standing there where anyone could see. She said she did not care. He did. His fingers slid down her wrist to her palm and held it there, warm against the cold rain. Neither of them moved. He did not let go until the storm passed, and when he did, her skin burned where his touch had been. After that night, something shifted. He no longer avoided her eyes in the car. He asked about Noah. He asked if she missed home. He asked if she trusted him. She lied every time. Yes, 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 though they both knew the truth was tangled up in the spaces between those words. He started bringing her to dinners that were not business. He ordered her favorite dishes before she could speak. He slipped his jacket over her shoulders when the restaurant was too cold. The first time she saw him smile and mean it was when she laughed at something on the news, her head thrown back in surprise. He caught her laugh like it was a fragile thing and held it in the quiet between them. One night, they sat side by side on the balcony where the rain had once washed her clean. Adrian poured 2 glasses of whiskey, but she only sipped once before setting hers aside. He asked if she wanted to leave. She asked if he would let her. He said no. She nodded like she understood, but her eyes stayed on his, steady and clear. He brushed her hair behind her ear, his thumb grazing her cheek. She thought he would kiss her then, but he only pulled back, like he did not trust himself to take what he already owned on paper. She fell asleep on the balcony chair, curled under his jacket, and when she woke at dawn, he was gone, but the jacket was still warm. By the time spring folded winter's cold away, Isabella no longer pretended that she hated him. She still pretended she did not care, but it was harder each time he stood too close or said her name in that soft, dangerous way that made her forget the weight of the contract. The city bloomed below the penthouse windows, but inside the walls she felt trapped in something that felt like love but tasted like fear. Some nights she dreamed about running. Some nights she dreamed about staying forever. Each morning she woke up and told herself none of it mattered because she was still just a poor cleaner caught in a secret too big to bury. And yet when Adrian looked at her across the polished dining table, when he reached for her hand and she did not pull away, she knew that whatever this was, it was no longer only about survival. By late spring, the city seemed softer somehow, but the walls around Adrian Harrison did not crumble as easily as winter frost. Isabella learned to read the moods that flickered behind his cold eyes, though he rarely said more than necessary when they were not alone. The boardroom remained a place of steel and calculation, but in the shadows behind closed doors, when the meetings ended and the city lights blinked awake, his voice sometimes slipped. He would ask if she remembered her mother's lullabies. He would ask if she believed in loyalty. He never asked if she was afraid of him, because they both knew the answer sat heavy between them each night she slept under his roof. One evening, a knock on her door woke Isabella just before midnight. She found Adrian in the hallway, still in his suit, his tie loose, his hair slightly damp like he had run a hand through it too many times. He said nothing at first, only stood there watching her as if he wanted to memorize her face for when he forgot how to breathe. Then he asked her to come with him. She followed him barefoot down the hall to his private office, where a thick file lay open on the desk. He pointed to the pages spread out like a crime scene. She saw numbers, names, dates, that meant little until she saw her own. Her name, her brother's medical bills, every payment he had covered tied to transactions she did not understand. She asked him why he was showing her this. He said because she needed to know who wanted her gone. The man standing beside Adrian that night in the conference room when this all began was not just an advisor. He was Adrian's uncle by blood, but by action, he was the viper coiled beneath the marble floors of Harrison Corp. Adrian explained that his uncle had been bleeding the company dry for years through ghost accounts and shadow deals, the kind that would bury the entire empire if the wrong person whispered to the press. Isabella asked what this had to do with her. He told her she was the insurance policy, the piece on the board he never meant to play but now could not live without. She was the secret shield between him and the men who would cut his throat if they smelled fear. She asked why he did not just let her run when she begged him weeks ago. He looked at her like he hated himself for a heartbeat. Before he said, because he did not want to lose the only thing in his world that did not lie to him. She could not sleep after that. She sat on the edge of her bed, the file still open on her lap, every line of ink reminding her that her freedom had always been an illusion. She thought of Noah's hospital room with the pale yellow curtains and the beeping monitors. She thought of her mother's funeral where no one but a priest spoke her name. She thought of Adrian standing alone in a boardroom filled with knives. She wondered if she hated him more for dragging her into his shadows or for making her want to stay. A week later, she found herself standing beside him at a charity gala hosted by Harrison Corp, dressed in a gown she could never afford, surrounded by the city's richest mouths, pretending not to stare. Adrian's hand rested low on her back, his touch warm enough to make her heart hammer, but gentle enough that she wondered if it was really him. She smiled when he needed her to smile, nodded when he whispered the names of people she should greet, and ignored the cutting looks from women who wore diamonds like armor. One of them, a tall figure with red lips and a voice like sugar dipped in poison, stepped too close and pressed a kiss to Adrian's cheek. Isabella felt the chill in her spine when Adrian did not flinch, but his hand tightened against her back like a silent promise. Later that night, in the backseat of the car, he told her that woman was more dangerous than any rival at the negotiating table. Her name was Evelyn Cross, and once she had been the only person who could melt the ice in his veins, until she decided his empire was worth more than his love. Isabella did not ask if he still loved Evelyn. She did not ask why the other woman had looked at her like a stain on white silk. She did not ask because questions meant answers, and answers meant truths she was not ready to carry. Instead, she watched the city blur past the tinted glass, while Adrian's hand brushed hers on the seat between them. He said nothing, but his thumb traced circles against her knuckles until the tension in her chest unwound just enough to let her breathe again. The next morning she woke up alone. She padded barefoot into the kitchen to find Lucas waiting by the marble island, his face stiff as ever. He told her not to worry when she asked where Adrian was. He told her to eat something, but the toast tasted like dust in her mouth. Hours crawled by until the sun dipped low behind the skyline and she heard the front door open. Adrian stepped inside with a cut above his eyebrow and bruises blooming beneath his collar. He brushed off her worry with one look that dared her to ask what price he paid to keep her here untouched. She pressed an ice pack to his temple anyway. He did not stop her. He only stared at her as if she were something precious and breakable, something he could not afford to lose. That night, she asked him the question she had bitten back for too long. Why me? Why not someone else? Adrian leaned back against the couch, the ice melting in his hand, and told her about the day he watched her on a security feed, this small girl scrubbing marble floors with more care than the suits who walked over them. He told her she was a ghost in a building that prided itself on perfection, yet she left no trace but shine. He said when she looked up at the camera that first night and begged him without words to let her go, he almost did. Almost. He said he kept her because if there was one thing left in the world worth protecting, it was the last pure thing he could not corrupt, no matter how badly he wanted to. Isabella wanted to scream that it was not fair to call her pure when he owned her name on paper like an object, when the whispers followed her like shadows in every hallway she stepped through. She wanted to tell him that he had already stained her in ways she could not wash off, but when he reached for her hand and held it like a vow, she forgot the anger that had bloomed in her chest. For the first time, she saw the boy beneath the man who wore tailored suits like armor. She saw the child who buried his mother alone while the world watched the stock market instead of his tears. She saw a man who built walls so high even he could not see the sky through them anymore. Days bled into nights, as secrets turned into confessions, whispered between sheets and half-finished glasses of wine. Adrian told her about the trust fund his father left, about the lawyers who would tear him apart if he showed weakness, about the uncle who would smile at his funeral before claiming his empire. Isabella told him about Noah's tiny fingers wrapped around hers in the hospital crib, about the nights she fell asleep counting how many pills she could skip to buy one more day of food. She told him about the letter she wrote to her mother every year on her birthday, though she never had an address to send it to. They shared their ghosts like offerings neither could promise to bury. One night she woke to find him sitting at the foot of her bed, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes glassy with exhaustion. He asked if she still dreamed of running. She told him yes, because honesty was all they had left. He nodded once, reached for her hand, pressed his lips to her knuckles and whispered that he would find a way to make her want to stay. She did not sleep after that. She stared at the ceiling while his breathing steadied beside her, and wondered when wanting him had started to feel like losing herself. When summer arrived, Isabella no longer felt like a guest in the penthouse, but she did not feel at home either. The contract still sat folded in the drawer beside her bed like a secret waiting to be burned. She thought about tearing it up each time Adrian kissed her temple before disappearing behind a wall of glass meetings and phone calls that never ended. She thought about staying when he traced the curve of her spine in the quiet hours before dawn and told her she was the only thing in his world that felt real. But deep down, she knew secrets like his did not stay buried. They only waited for the right moment to claw their way to the surface. The first crack in the illusion came on a warm night when the city outside the penthouse shimmered with summer lights and the air inside tasted like secrets ready to spill. Isabella sat alone at the dining table tracing the rim of a cold coffee cup while Adrian's voice drifted down the hallway behind his office door. She heard another voice too, sharper, mocking. She recognized it before she even saw the shadow that slithered out when the door finally swung open. Evelyn Cross stepped into the hallway like she owned every polished tile beneath her heels. She paused just long enough to let her eyes sweep over Isabella with that same pitying disdain she always wore like perfume. Without a word, she disappeared down the corridor. Adrian followed seconds later, jaw clenched, tie loosened as if he needed more air than the walls would give him. Isabella asked him what Evelyn wanted. He did not answer right away. He sat across from her, rubbed a hand over his face, then told her the thing she always feared he would say. The board wanted him to sign a merger deal with Evelyn's family company, the same deal his uncle had been pushing behind closed doors for months. They wanted a wedding, a show of unity to mask the bleeding cracks in Harrison Corp's armor. He told her it meant nothing but numbers and stock prices. She asked what it meant for her. His silence said everything his mouth would not. The next days blurred together in a haze of forced smiles and stilted conversations. Isabella felt her heart pound whenever her phone buzzed, but it was never him. He was always somewhere else, in meetings that stretched until dawn, at dinners she was not invited to, wrapped in the kind of polite lies that smelled like betrayal. Lucas kept her busy with tasks that did not matter, pointless errands that felt like invisible chains. One evening, she found herself in the guest bedroom, folding laundry that was not hers, her fingers trembling when she picked up a silk scarf, still scented with Evelyn's perfume. She wanted to throw it out the window, but all she did was press it flat, her throat tight with words she did not have the right to say. When Adrian finally came home that night, she was waiting for him in the kitchen, the contract clutched in her fist like a lifeline she had forgotten how to let go of. She asked him if he was going to marry Evelyn. He said no. She asked him if he could swear it. He looked at her, eyes red with exhaustion, and told her some wars could not be won without sacrifices. She asked if she was just one of those sacrifices. He stepped forward, reached for her cheek, but she pulled back so fast the chair behind her scraped across the marble. She told him she could not stay if he chose the empire over her. He told her she could not leave because he would never let her. She hated the way his voice cracked when he said it, but she hated more how her heart cracked too. 2 days later, she disappeared. She packed her old clothes, the ones she came in with, left the silk dresses hanging untouched in the closet like ghosts of the life she was abandoning. Lucas tried to stop her at the elevator, but she told him she had no more secrets worth stealing. He let her pass, though his eyes said he would pay for it later. She rode the subway back to the tiny apartment she used to call home. Noah's room was still painted pale yellow, but the crib was gone, replaced by a small bed lined with toy dinosaurs. He asked her why she was crying when she tucked him in that night. She told him she was not crying, just tired. He told her she did not have to be alone anymore. She wished he was right. Isabella found work at a diner 3 blocks from the hospital. She worked the graveyard shift, pouring coffee for truck drivers and lonely drunks, scraping tips into a glass jar she kept hidden beneath the counter. She told herself it was enough. She told herself it had to be. But every night when she locked up and walked home through streets that felt too quiet without the hum of Adrian's world behind her, She wondered if he ever looked for her. She told herself she did not care. Months passed before the sickness came. She fainted behind the diner's counter one night, the coffee pot shattering on the floor beside her. The doctor's words echoed through her skull like thunder. She was pregnant. She laughed when he said it, like it was a cruel joke the universe thought she deserved. She thought about not telling him at all. She thought about running again, far enough that he would never find her. But the memory of his hand against her cheek, the way he whispered her name when he thought she was asleep, refused to die. She knew what she had to do. When she returned to the penthouse, the doorman barely recognized her. Lucas opened the door before she could knock twice. He looked at her belly first, then her eyes, something almost like relief flickering across his face before he stepped aside. Adrian stood by the window, with the city sprawled out behind him, an empire of glass and steel that seemed so small compared to the space between them. He turned when he heard her voice. She told him she needed to talk. He did not speak. He crossed the room in 3 steps, pulled her into his arms so tightly she thought he might crush every bone she had spent months rebuilding. He asked her why she left. She asked him why he let her. He kissed her forehead like a promise he did not know how to keep. She told him about the baby. His hands fell to her belly, trembling in a way she had never seen before. He asked if it was his. She almost laughed at the stupidity of the question, but the tears burned too hot behind her eyes. She nodded. He said he would fix everything. She asked him what that meant. He told her he would end the merger, expose his uncle, burn down every lie he had ever told to keep her in a cage. She asked him what it would cost. He told her it would cost him everything, but her and the child, and that was a price he would pay twice if he had to. The next morning, the headlines screamed betrayal and scandal. Evelyn Cross denied everything, but the photographs leaked faster than her lawyers could spin excuses. Adrian's uncle resigned quietly before the board could vote him out. Stocks dipped, then rebounded higher than before when investors realized the empire stood stronger without the poison bleeding it dry. In the middle of the chaos, Adrian stood on a stage in front of cameras and microphones and told the world about the woman who cleaned his marble floors and heard his darkest secret, and chose to stay anyway. He did not call her his mistress. He called her his future. That night they sat side by side on the penthouse balcony, the city lights blinking like stars they could almost touch. Isabella rested her head on his shoulder, his hand warm against her stomach where their child grew steady and strong. She asked him if he was scared. He told her he was terrified. She asked him if he would run. He told her he would stay until there was nothing left to hold but her hand in his. She believed him because the truth no longer needed shadows to hide behind. Adrian kept his promise in the only way he knew how. He stripped his world bare of lies and left only the truth between them like a fragile bridge they both had to cross. But secrets never truly die. They wait like restless ghosts for a crack to slip through. As the weeks turned to months and Isabella's belly grew round beneath her sweaters, the city outside seemed quieter than before. Yet inside, the penthouse, the storm never truly settled. Sometimes she woke at night to find Adrian sitting at the edge of the bed, his phone glowing cold in his hand as he read lines of numbers she did not understand. He would look at her, brush her hair back, whisper that everything was fine. She knew better than to believe a man who had spent his entire life mastering the art of hiding what hurt him most. One evening, Isabella stood by the window, watching the snow drift over the city. She pressed a hand to her stomach and felt the faint flutter of life inside her. She wondered if their child would know this silence, if he would ever understand how the love that made him came wrapped in shadows that never fully vanished. Adrian stepped behind her, his hand slipping over hers, his chin resting on her shoulder as he breathed in the scent of her hair. He told her they should leave the city for a while, find a house where the baby could have a garden instead of a skyline. She wanted to believe him, wanted to say yes, but something inside her knew that a man like Adrian Harrison could never run far enough to leave his empire behind. She turned in his arms and asked him if he was ready to let it all go. He kissed her instead of answering, and in that kiss she tasted both promise and fear. A few days later, Evelyn Cross reappeared like a ghost that refused to stay buried. Isabella found her waiting in the lobby when she returned from a doctor's appointment, the chill in Evelyn's eyes sharp enough to cut. Evelyn smiled without warmth, her gaze dropping to Isabella's belly before dragging back up with cruel precision. She said she came to wish her luck, said she hoped the baby would survive what was coming. Isabella asked her what that meant, but Evelyn only laughed, her heels clicking away on the marble as if she owned every echo left behind. That night, Isabella told Adrian about the encounter. He did not look surprised. He promised her that Evelyn could do nothing anymore, that the board trusted no one but him now. But Isabella heard the hesitation buried beneath his steady voice and knew that some snakes simply shed their skins to strike again. Winter deepened. The holidays came and went in a blur of board meetings and whispered calls behind closed doors. Isabella spent most days alone in the penthouse, reading baby books she barely understood, wondering what kind of father Adrian would be when power no longer ruled every hour of his life. Sometimes she wondered what kind of mother she could be, when the only thing she knew for sure was how to survive. She kept a bag packed in the closet, just in case the past found its way back to tear the future apart before it even began. One night, as snow piled high against the windows, Adrian came home later than ever. He smelled of whiskey and cold air, his coat damp from the storm outside. Isabella helped him out of it, her fingers brushing the bruises blooming beneath his collar. She asked him where he had been. He told her he was protecting her, protecting their child. She asked him who he was fighting this time. He did not answer. Instead, he pulled her close, pressed his forehead to hers, told her that if anything happened to him, she had to take the baby and run. She told him nothing would happen because she would not let it. He laughed, the sound hollow, then kissed her like he needed her to anchor him to the life he was trying to build from the ashes of his old one. Days later, the trap Evelyn promised finally snapped shut. Isabella woke to find the penthouse swarming with unfamiliar faces, men in suits tearing through drawers and cabinets, barking questions she could not answer. Adrian stood in the center of it all, calm and cold, his arms folded, as if daring them to find something worth destroying. They called it an investigation, whispered words like fraud and embezzlement, each one a spark meant to ignite the fire Evelyn had been feeding in the dark. Isabella clutched her belly, her heart pounding so loud she thought it might drown out the storm raging around her. Adrian met her eyes across the chaos, one silent look that told her to trust him, even when trust felt like standing at the edge of a cliff with no railing to hold. By nightfall, the men were gone, but the damage lingered like smoke in the walls. Adrian poured himself a drink and sat at the dining table, staring at the glass as if it might tell him what came next. Isabella stood beside him, one hand resting on his shoulder, the other pressed protectively to the child growing inside her. She asked him if this was the end. He told her it was just the beginning. She asked him if they would survive it. He looked up at her then, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them, and told her he would burn down every lie, every threat, every ghost if it meant she and their child would never know the life that made him the man he was now. Weeks passed, with the tension stretched so thin it felt like one wrong word would shatter it. Headlines screamed betrayal and downfall. Rumors spread like wildfire, feeding on half-truths and old grudges. Some nights, Adrian disappeared into meetings that lasted until dawn, returning with blood on his knuckles and shadows under his eyes. Isabella stopped asking where he had been because she knew he was fighting wars she could not help him win. Instead, she focused on the small things she could control. The nursery painted soft green, the tiny clothes folded neatly in drawers, the lullabies she hummed under her breath when she could not sleep. Then one morning, the news changed. The charges fell apart. Evidence Evelyn planted crumbled under scrutiny when Lucas came forward with files Adrian had kept hidden for years. The empire Adrian fought to protect stood battered but unbroken, stronger now that the poison had been forced into the light. Evelyn vanished from the city like a ghost finally exorcised. Isabella watched Adrian stand before cameras once more, his voice steady as he told the world that Harrison Corp belonged to no one but the truth now. He looked directly into the lens, his last words not for shareholders or enemies, but for her alone. He said that loyalty was not bought with contracts or fear, but with love strong enough to outlast any secret. The reporters wrote it off as corporate spin, but Isabella knew better. She knew every word was a vow he would keep, even if it cost him every dollar he ever made. That night they lay side by side in bed, the city quiet outside their window for the first time in months. Isabella traced the lines of his jaw, the faint scar above his brow, the soft curve of his lips when he finally allowed himself to rest. She asked him if he would ever regret choosing her over the Empire. He told her she was the Empire. She laughed, the sound muffled against his chest as his arms pulled her closer. She whispered that one day their child would know the whole story, every broken piece that led them here, every lie turned truth, every secret turned promise. When the baby finally came on a crisp spring night, Adrian was there holding her hand so tight she thought he might leave bruises she would cherish forever. He whispered her name over and over like a prayer he never learned how to say until her soft cry filled the sterile hospital room. He held their son first, his fingers trembling, his eyes shining in a way no boardroom or bank vault could ever reflect. He looked at Isabella, his voice rough with awe, and told her he finally understood what it meant to have something worth losing everything for. The weeks after the baby arrived passed in a blur of quiet nights and soft cries that filled the penthouse with a warmth Isabella never thought marble floors could hold. Adrian moved through the rooms like a man reborn, no longer hidden behind boardrooms and guarded smiles, but barefoot in the nursery at 3 a.m, humming broken lullabies he claimed not to know. Sometimes Isabella would wake to find him sitting in the rocking chair with their son curled against his chest, his eyes closed, his hand gently tracing tiny fingers that gripped his thumb like a lifeline. Neither of them wanted to let go. They named him Noah James Harrison, a name that carried the memory of her brother and the hope of a life free from secrets that poisoned everything they once touched. Some nights Isabella would stand by the nursery door, watching father and son breathe in tandem, the quiet so complete it almost made her believe that the world outside had forgotten their names. She knew better, of course. The city never truly forgets, but inside these walls they had carved out a space where love could grow like light through a cracked ceiling, fragile yet unstoppable. Adrian still took calls that sometimes turned his voice sharp and cold. The echo of the empire he built never fully silenced, but he always came back to her, back to the tiny heartbeat they had made together. When she asked him if he missed the chase, the endless nights spent clawing at power with bleeding hands, he only shook his head and told her he had found something better than control. He told her he had found peace in the quiet weight of a baby's breath against his collarbone, and the way she smiled at him like he was worth saving, long before he ever believed it himself. On the baby's first morning home, Isabella stood on the balcony, wrapped in Adrian's coat. The city stretched out before her like a promise she no longer feared. She thought about the girl she had been, the cleaner who overheard a secret too big for her tiny world, the girl who traded her freedom for survival and found love instead. She knew now that love was never a transaction, never something that could be forced or signed away. It was built in stolen glances and soft confessions whispered when the world stopped watching. It was made real in sacrifices that did not feel like losses, but like roads leading home. Adrian stepped out behind her, his arms slipping around her waist as he pressed a kiss to her neck. He told her he had something for her, and when she turned, he slipped a small velvet box into her palm. Inside lay a simple gold band, no diamonds, no name engraved, just a promise forged in every moment that brought them here. He did not drop to one knee. He did not need to. He only looked at her the way he always did now, like she was the only secret left he wanted to keep forever. She said yes before he even asked, because some answers were written long before the questions found breath. Years later, when people asked how they survived the scandals, the betrayal, the storm of whispers that never truly died, Isabella would smile and tell them it was simple. She would tell them money could build empires, but only love could save a soul. And when the city lights flickered awake each night, high above them, Adrian would hold her close, their son's laughter filling the halls that once echoed with silence, and he would remind her that some secrets are worth hearing if they lead you home.